right, it's 6 o'clock. Welcome everybody to the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society. I'm Susan Wands. I'm facilitating this meeting, which is being hosted by Faith Justice, and I'm going to turn it over to her right now. Take it away, Faith.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And welcome Carrie Hayes to our HNS NYC last meeting of 2020. And Carrie's going to be talking to us about something that I think is very timely in that she wrote a book about the sister and the woman who ran for president of the United States, first ones in 1872, if I remember right. And so, you know, we just come out of a big election. We're going to have our first woman in the White House as VP, which we're, I'm sure, all very excited about. But before we get started with Carrie, I wanted to just take a couple minutes and you know, let people join us, but also tell you about our organization. The Historical Novel Society New York City chapter is part of a much larger organization, but we are a local group, and we are an all-volunteer army. So there's no dues to pay us if you join. It's just a matter of showing up and getting on our mailing list or joining us on Facebook. And Susan will put all our social media information in the chat. So at a later time, you want to go back and check it out. It'll all be there. And we have a website. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. And we've got email. And so, you know, we really encourage people to join us somewhere in there. I just wanted to acknowledge again that this is our last meeting for the year, and it was a challenging year. When we started off in January, we were in the Jefferson Market Street Library. I actually ran that meeting as well, so I kind of bookending the year here. And I think we had around 30 people, maybe 35, for that topic, which was audiobooks. And that's about what we would get when we'd have our meetings. Somewhere between 25 and 35 people could crowd into the library space. But we were very excited about all our programs, and we had lots of really good and interesting people coming up. And when COVID hit and the library shut down, it sent us all spinning. And, we got together as a steering committee, and we're just throwing, spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. And we finally decided, okay, well, let's try this Facebook streaming thing. And we did that for a program. And then we tried Zoom, and we tried another platform or two. And one of the things that we found that this challenge really brought out a lot of interesting opportunities for us. We were able to, when we streamed online, get at least our 30, 35 people. And then when we would put and sometimes it was much more than that, sometimes we got 70, 100 people from all over the United States and internationally, where before people had to be in New York City and trek over to the library. So we started recording these things, we started putting them up on our Facebook group, and we have hundreds and hundreds of more people joining us for all these wonderful programs. So this is something that we will continue to do even after COVID goes away, because we can just reach so many people doing this. We'll probably have some blended, as our mayor likes to say about education, where we will have some in-person groups. They will probably be more social in nature, and we will probably keep our programming online, because we can just reach a lot of people this way. So it was challenging. The steering committee just rose to the challenge. Wonderful people, worked hard. And I do want to give a special shout out to Susan, who has been our tech person and has handled all of our meetings lately. So Susan, thank you, thank you, thank you. So looking forward to 2021, one of the things I want to let you guys in on is please watch for an email. If you're on this, if you got a Zoom link from us, you're on our email. But we're going to be putting out some, calls for, not action, I guess, but we want people to join us in our journey, because we can do so much more. Many hands make light work. So keep an eye out. We'll be putting information out about other projects that we want to do and how you might help us out with that. Also coming up is the North American Conference of the Historical Novel Society, which is June 24th through the 26th. It's supposedly going to be in San Antonio, but in an email I got today, they basically said maybe. So they are planning on a virtual component, if not the entire thing being virtual. People who want to present to or attend, either one, you'll have to join the national organization. But it doesn't cost that much, and quite frankly, I find it to be extremely useful. So that meeting is going to be on the 24th through the 26th. If you are interested at all in presenting at the conference, they're going to have a call for program proposals December 1st through January 7th. And if you want more information on it, you can go to their website, and it is hns-conference.com. It's that simple. Not all the information is there. So I hope people get involved because it's a blast. I've loved everyone I've been to, and I've been to all but one. So that's all of the boilerplate. And I want to get started now with our presenter, Carrie. And I just wanted to read the bio that Carrie had on the back of her book because I just loved it. It was one of the best book bios I read. So Carrie Hayes was born in New York City and grew up around journalists, idealists, and rule-breaking women. This is her first book. So we're going to talk about a couple of those rule-breaking women, and I think you'll be as fascinated as I was in reading the book because they're amazing characters. So, but to get us started, to kind of put us in place and time with these characters, Carrie, could you just give us like a brief overview of what was happening in the country then? I mean, it was post-Civil War and lots of stuff was happening. So what's the back?
Yes, I also have this little share screen, and I'm going to try and just share it so that I can give you a sort of tableau. Can you see it? Am I sharing it?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, press share. There we go. How about that? This is a traffic jam on Broadway circa 1868, 1869. And so the Civil War has ended a couple of years earlier. They've had an impeachment of an inept president who was the vice president of Abraham Lincoln, as you know, and Ulysses S. Grant has basically just been swept into office almost, sort of as a mandate because of his efforts during the Civil War. And he has been left with a country where in the South has been pretty much obliterated. Only a few of the Confederate states have returned to the Union. There are still several that have yet to return to the fold properly and will not do so until 1870. He has guaranteed freedoms to all men who had been enslaved, and presumably women too, but that didn't really mean anything at the time. And he also has an enormous amount of corruption going on in and around his administration through no fault of his own. It's just the reality of the environment. At the same time, the women who had been very much at the forefront of the abolitionist movement had been absolutely convinced that they would be included in the 14th and 15th Amendments. And when they were not, the fury and the disappointment and the outrage was, for any of the women who are amongst us tonight, you can well imagine what it felt like. So there was this really intense, discordant situation going on culturally, politically. It was a pretty rocky time.
Yeah. So, what were some of the social movements that were going on then? I mean, you mentioned the treatment of formerly enslaved people
Yes.
and the women's suffrage. Were there any other
Oh,
social
yes,
movements?
yes. The counterculture movement was probably something that would rival what was going on in the 1960s and the 20th century. There were there were radical Republicans who believed that the South should have to pay for everything that had gone on before while Reconstruction was going on. So they had a very strident sort of perspective. There were the uh, Negro Republicans who were the formerly enslaved people who were becoming politically active. There were the Pantarchs, they were the Cosmo political parties. There were the anarchists, the statists, and the list goes on. And of course, the spiritualists as well. So it was just this wild tapestry of social activity that was going on. And also the free love movement was very, very much a part of the scene. And the free love movement had sort of two camps, one of which were the alternative lifestyle, sort of collective marriage arrangements, reinventing marriage. And then there was Victoria Woodhull's take on free love, which really had to do with female agency. Free love meaning a woman was free to choose what was going to happen in and around the marriage bed. So.
Mhm. Yeah, that does sound like a very modern take on things.
Yes.
How was that received generally? I mean, was she like out there alone on the mountaintop, or were there lots of other men and women who were in this movement with her?
Well, she was a lightning rod,
Mhm.
certainly, but she was not alone. And in fact, people were wildly engaged by what she had to say because the entire country was so burnt out from what had been going on with the war. So many people, the depression and the the pain that people suffer following a war had really impacted the country. So people were really looking to reinvent how we would live and how everyone would have more of an equal say. And so Victoria, she came to New York with her husband, her second husband, this guy named James Blood, Colonel James Blood, who was a disciple of a man named Stephen Pearl Andrews. And Stephen Pearl Andrews was sort of a local New York genius. He had been involved in a commune on Long Island called Modern Times. He had a brownstone with alternative lifestyles inside of the brownstone for a long time. He was part of the Bohemian movement. He was close with Walt Whitman. He was close with all the literary people of that time. And he was a free thinker. And James Blood was absolutely attached to Pearl Andrews' ideas. And so one of your questions was, well, what brought her to New York? Victoria would say it was her spiritual advisor, Demosthenes, the Greek orator. She always would say, why did you do this? Why did you do that? She would always say, because Demosthenes told her to do it. But I think really it was, in fact, her husband wanted to be closer to his mentor.
Interesting.
Mm.
Quick question. Do you think that she really was communicating with Demosthenes, or is this part of her persona, her presentation or character? Did she really believe in the spiritualism? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes. Yes,
She
she
did.
did.
Okay,
Yes,
so
she did.
she really felt she was hearing voices and
Well,
characters.
I don't know about hearing voices, but Susan, your book has to do with the Golden Dawn, the people who were involved with the Golden Dawn, and Victoria was hugely enthusiastic about the Golden Dawn after she moved to London, and she did several profiles on major players in that group. I mean, she never disavowed the spiritualist movement.
Okay, interesting. You spend a lot of time also with her sister,
Yes,
Tennessee. Is it Claflin or Clay?
Claflin. That's how I say it. Some people say Claflin, but
Oh,
I just say Claflin.
So what kind of the sisters seem to be very, very close.
Yes.
in your book. And I also understand that your book is fiction, but so I'm trying to get at what is fiction, what is fact in your research.
Well, the younger sister, who was the youngest child in the family, had been a performer and supporting the family from about the age of 8. And she would do a clairvoyant act, and she was called the Wonderful Child, and she would do all kinds of predictions. And then as she got older, she got into magnetic healing, and she would cure cancers without use of medication or implements within 2 to 24 hours, allegedly. So this was the family business. And by the time Tennessee was an adult, she had decided she didn't want to be doing that anymore. And one thing that I don't go into in too much detail was that she and her father were involved during the war with a woman who had breast cancer, and the father had produced some publicity about the woman being cured, but in fact the woman died very shortly thereafter, and her family sued them, and an indictment of manslaughter was brought. Tennessee was indicted for manslaughter, and she sort of skipped town, and it didn't really raise its head again until the sequel, which I'm hard at work on. But so there was this element that Tennessee had towards her work, and ambivalence towards her work, but also she had been successful enough that she had quite a bit of, professional pride in what she had done previously. And people did come to them in New York at the beginning of their time there, seeking treatment.
Okay. Yeah, the whole family is fascinating. I mean, what could you talk to us just for a couple minutes about the parents, and how they were raising this whole family in this milieu?
Yes, well, what's interesting about them, and this is also what made Victoria and Tennessee so irresistible to me, is that the parents have gotten a really terrible rap. The parents of legend were really crazy. I mean, crazy, terrifying crazy. The mother was in a religious frenzy, or else she'd be beating the kids, or else she'd be imploring the kids to do something. The father, he had a reputation of possibly pimping the daughters. I mean, all kinds of crazy. However, if you look at the scholarship that's been done more recently on them, and you look at how Victoria presents her biography, and you look at how the parents were always close. They stayed close. They went to England with them, and they died in England in a very comfortable setup. I tend to think that this was part of the show, that it was more interesting. At one point, Victoria is very, very angry with her parents because they sabotage her chances in the suffragist movement. And the mother takes the Victoria's second husband to court, and this generates a lot of terrible press for them. And I believe that Victoria used that opportunity to punish her parents in the press. In a way, that once these allegations are made, they never go away. Right. So I think that she probably did that because, both she and Tennessee had very little schooling, almost none. But these women were so dazzlingly intellectual that they would have been learning their stuff at their father's knee. And I think that there were 5 girls in the family. All of them were divorced. All of them were remarried more than once, at a time when divorce was illegal in the country in many places, where it was really hard to get a divorce. And that he gave these women a sense of enough moxie and optimism to remarry says something about the parents that we're not seeing, that the women would believe enough in themselves to go forward and keep partnering.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, the parents in the book are a little bit on the domineering side, I guess.
I go really easy on them too. I mean, the other novels, they're doing all kinds of heinous, crazy stuff. And I thought that maybe I should do that originally, but but the longer you look at the material and the more you think about it, and the more you think about how, parents are the stuff of, psychiatry's bread and butter. It starts with the parents, right? It's all about the parents. So I tend to think that it was probably not as salacious as the implications were.
Okay. Well, you brought up the whole intellectual milieu that they were in, particularly here in New York. So where did they fit in this? I mean, who were they palling around with and meeting and taking information from? And
I'm just going
Everyone.
to interrupt real quick. Carrie, if you're done with your slideshow, you might want to get out of the big view so that we can see more of your beautiful faces.
Oh, well, I have another picture. How do
Okay,
I get
great.
to the next? There it is.
All right,
This is Fulton Street Market around that time. And this, how do I get to the next one? Ah, this is their first address. This is Great Jones Street in 1870-ish. This is on the corner of Lafayette and Great Jones Street. And the girls, their family lived at 17 Great Jones Street in 1868, 1869. So this is New York at that time. So now I'll pause the share. I'll stop the share.
okay. All right. So how many people were living in that? It looked like it was multi-generational and lots of ex-lovers and
Yes. Yeah, about 14 on any given week. And then the cast would change all the time, so coming and going. So it was a great big family house. Everyone lived there. There was a lot of scheming, backstabbing, jealousy, hurt feelings, bad behavior, yelling, and servants, running out into the street. It was just your average dysfunctional family.
Okay. Well, then back to my previous question then, like,
who did
where
they hang out with?
Yeah, who'd they hang out with? I know you'd mentioned that they actually knew Grant and Grant's family. I mean, among many.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when Victoria was introduced to Stephen Pearl Andrews, he very quickly learned that she had a photographic memory or perfect recall. And he very quickly put together that the way that she could deliver a line and the way that she could speak and present herself was pretty compelling. And also, they did want to change society. And so she started to court the suffragist movement. And she wanted to go right to the front of the queue. And around that time, Tennessee was introduced to Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was the richest man in America. Cornelius was 50 years Tennessee's senior. He was closer in age to her elderly father than to herself. And they began a relationship that some people swear it was a sexual relationship. Other people say it's allegedly a sexual relationship. Nobody really knows the truth. But he did bankroll these girls in a meaningful way. And he fronted Victoria some money on what would become the first Black Friday when the gold market was cornered on Wall Street, which enabled her to walk away with about $750,000 in money of that time. So if it was 2020, it would be about $11 million, that's quite a chunk of change. I mean, she's 33 years old at the time. Tennessee is 7 years younger. And they decide, okay, well, let's do some investment. And they begin Woodhull and Claflin and Company. And it's an investment firm designed for ladies to be able to invest their own savings and money. And Cornelius supported them in this endeavor. And they started out on slightly shaky ground. But around that time also, they befriended people in the press and they generated press. And then they realized that if they wanted to further, if Victoria wanted to further her aspirations politically, socially, that she should get her own press, because Susan B. Anthony had her own press and lots of ladies had their own press. And I didn't know this, But there were like 5,000 professional lady journalists in New York City. There was like a real community of lady journalists who were respected by their male colleagues. So while all this awful shenanigans was going on, while the lady who just passed away, who was the head of the business section of the New York Times, Marilyn Bender, I think was her name, Margaret Bender, you know, talking about how men just never respected her, and she had to deal with all this sexist stuff, which people still have to deal with. These female journalists existed. The highest paid syndicated columnist in the United States at that time was a woman, and her name was Fanny Fern. And she coined the phrase, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So these gals decided they'll be journalists too. And they started their own paper. But they were friends with everyone. And they were the only people who were perhaps less ubiquitous than the Claflin sisters would be the Kardashians today.
Okay. That's an interesting parallel. Yeah. So Carrie, we've had a couple requests for you to read, and I just want to let people know that we will get to that. You know, I just have a couple more questions, and then Carrie can read from her book. So, you mentioned that she was wanted to go to the head of the queue in the women's suffrage movement. How was she received?
Initially, pretty well, not great, but well enough. Women's ambivalence towards other women is somewhat notorious, as seen by the 2016 election results, perhaps. So she was met with some caution, but she started her speech. She started speaking, and then she decided to make a mighty contribution so that they might be more favorably disposed towards her. And the suffragist movement at that time was divided in two. There was the American women's suffragist movement, and then there was the national women's suffragist movement. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan Anthony were part of the national women's suffragist movement, as opposed to Lucy Stone and that other group. And so Victoria wooed them. She went to Washington, D.C. She presented a memorial in front of the Judiciary Committee, sponsored by Benjamin Butler, who was a avowed suffragist enthusiast. And he was a senator, and he sort of mentored her a little bit. He didn't get a big part in my book because there's just only so many people could fit in there. I'm just like shoving them in. And as a result of that speech, she was then invited to speak at the convention because they realized that here was a live one, and she was getting all kinds of press. And she came and she did her magnificent Lincoln Hall speech, that she pays taxes, that she follows the law, and yet she is denied. She is denied for no other reason than her gender. And it was a great argument that women were already citizens. They had every right to vote. There was no legalese that had ever excluded them from the process. So.
Yeah, was that part of the 14th Amendment?
The 14th and then the 15th as well. Both of them, the 14th Amendment used the word male, and which started the frenzy. And then the 15th Amendment did not have the word sex. It was supposed to say regardless of one's sex. One's in color, one's race, one's servitude, and it was also supposed to say sex, but it didn't have that. And that's what started. That's really what gave the racism of the women's suffragist movement in this country. That's what gave it the traction. You're mute, dear Faith.
Yes, I noticed. So that gets me to another area, which is her VP was Frederick Douglass. They ran together on.
But he had nothing to do with that. I mean, it was just what? Who? What? They didn't even know each other. She was very close to one of his best friends, who was this guy, Pascal Randolph. They were very close. And Pascal Randolph published in her paper, and he's the father of the American occult. But Fred Douglass was included in this to walk the walk. You know, that to say that she really did believe in equal rights for everyone, that she did really believe that people of color should have the same rights as people who were white. And she included Frederick Douglass in that campaign for that reason. But they didn't meet until 1887, much later.
Ah, all right. I had not realized that. I didn't, I know it wasn't in your book, but it was just kind of like, whoa.
I know, exactly. There was so much, whoa. I mean, just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so few modern people seem to know about Victoria Woodhull, and her groundbreaking run. I mean, we have a lot of people who are kind of ignorant of history anyway, but this seems to be the kind of thing that would have come up like in Hillary's campaign or something like that. But why is it you think her story has kind of, slipped away a little bit?
It had a lot to do with the sexual rights. It had mostly to do with that, I think. It had to do with that. It had to do with also the fact that her own private life was so tumultuous. And it also had to do with the fact that when people would not cooperate with her, she had a reputation for threatening them with blackmail, basically, with coercion or libel in the papers, that she would just print unfavorable things about them. And so she became very toxic. But basically, during 1872, at the suffragist convention, she upstaged Susan Anthony because, Victoria had started her presidential campaign by then. She was running for office at that time. And they were going to do like the big launch at the convention. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton was in favor of it. And Susan Anthony was not, because she felt that the issue should be the vote only. No equal rights, no sexual rights, nothing to do with bodies, nothing. And so Victoria went out, she upstaged her, offended Susan Anthony beyond measure. And as a result, Susan Anthony saw that Victoria basically was written out of the record.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's vengeful.
Yes, yes.
So were there any lessons from her run that you feel that women candidates in our more recent times or in the future can take from that?
Well, I think that the double standard with language was effectively exercised in this last go around when we had a candid discussion about what it is to be ambitious and things like that. What it is to assume your power, to step into your power, what it is to call a spade a spade. And I think that women have, as a result of what happened in 2016, women were much less precious and also understood that, as Rachel Cagle said, the most marvelous thing, that that if there is not intentional and action-based inclusion of women of color, then feminism is simply white supremacy in heels. Which, when you think about it, there's a lot of truth to that statement, because we all have to go forward. Everyone, and that the women of color who fought for the cause and were constantly pushed back, that there had to be some kind of a reckoning with that too. And so all of these things, that the beginnings of the movement are so closely linked with the abolitionist movement, and then it should divide. The only way that everybody's going to be equal is if everybody is equal.
Right. Okay. I've got one more question for you, and I want to encourage people to write your questions in the chat because we are going to have audience participation. So one more question for you, and then I'm going to ask you to read, and that'll give people more of a chance as well to get their thoughts together and put them in the chat. And if folks come up dry with questions, I do have more questions. So. All right, so the big question, when it comes to any author, what inspired you to write this book?
I recognized these women. I fell in love with them, and I recognized them instantly because they reminded me of my mom.
Ah, your mom.
Completely self-invented. They were women who said, okay, this is my path. And they chose their path. No matter the fact they had no qualifications, they had no pedigree, they had no reason to believe that they would be successful. And they just did their thing. And it's extraordinary when you meet people in history so far back who do their thing with such effect and without apology. It's just breathtaking. And so that was that.
All right. I understand that. I've gone back through history, and like all the heroines in my books have been,
they're smart as heck. Your empresses. They are smart, and they don't suffer fools.
No, not at all. So it is fun to see it and to realize these were real women doing real things, and that we need to shine a light on them more.
Right. And I was also intrigued was why didn't I know about these women? Why do so few people know about these women?
Mm-hmm.
That was really amazing to me.
Yeah. So would you read for us? Do you have a passage that you would like to share with us?
Dun, dun, dun. I do. That's the music that comes in the middle. Here we go. It's towards the beginning of the book. Victoria's son, Byron, is almost 13, but he more closely resembles a boy half his age. Come here, darling, give Mama a squeeze. When he puts his arms around her, there's the pang of never knowing. Was it from being dropped, or his father just a drunkard that destroyed this child's intellect? She pulls away to study him and sweeps the hair from his eyes. You're such a big boy, Byron. Go with Zula and the Colonel. Go on now. Buck waits for his grandson to leave the room. He wants Victoria's full attention, but she's deep in thought, arranging herself on the divan. About the show, Buck says. She isn't quite ready, vexed that she is still consumed with Zula and Byron's father. Oh, the countless sorrows of having lived with an addict. She gives herself a little shake. Why does her ancient heartache continue to plague her so? She and Buck need this moment alone. This room they call the library is in the front of the house. She can look out the tall windows and watch her beloved new husband, Colonel Blood, take the children outside. The sky is somewhat overcast, but he'll bring them in if it begins to rain. Buck is speaking, and Victoria's mind has wandered off. Mistakes, errors, Dr. Canning Woodhull, and what happened to dearest Byron. Victoria has always claimed her parents forced her into marriage, but even she admits that it's just a ruse. She had been 14 and burning with desire, anxious to lose her embarrassing, crazy parents, to get away from her father and her Uncle Thankful and his family. At times, there'd been as many as 24 children under one roof. Besides, Canning was handsome and appeared to have resources. One of those missteps when one marries for love. She sighs and turns her attention back to her father. You know, Tenny's war chest is considerable. Yes, she answers. My way of thinking is, if we continue with the healing and clairvoyance, you'll learn enough that you and Blood can pay me back. Pay you back? But that money is Tennessee's. Oh, Vicky, it's Tennessee's in name only. Who do you think worked as her agent and booked her the jobs? Who organized the provision for this family? Tenny may have the talent and she may have the gift, but it took her father's love and expertise to supervise this endeavor. How can you dare to claim such a thing, Pa? It took every last ounce of my strength and my ingenuity as the Cancer King to ensure the magnificent child was successful. And the arrest warrant? How successful was that? That's not fair. That woman would have died regardless of Tenny's ministrations. How was I to know they'd lodge a complaint? They are at an impasse. Victoria says, Tenny is done with the show, Pa. They sit in silence. One good client, he says. You only need one. Well, it isn't going to be Harriet Beecher Stowe. Ah, well, he says. She is only the most revered and well-loved woman in America. And then laughs heartily. Eventually, shaking her head, Victoria laughs too. After a few moments, Buck says, a man would probably be better. Then Tenny can put the full force of her gifts, as it were, to use. We just need one good client. When she's got him, you can take care of the rest. How would I do that? With the spirits, of course. Once a believer, always a believer. Victoria leans back on the divan. Why not? Tennessee is 24 years old and knows her way around. She's been a married woman. One does what one must. Buck is right. With one good client, they won't need to do the show. They won't need to do it at all. Note, all clairvoyants must use great caution in matters of sex. Abstinence is good. Totally so is better. For an error in that direction is fatal to clear vision or its perpetuity when possessed. From the Guide to Clairvoyance by P.B. Randolph.
Thank you. I muted myself so I wouldn't be interrupting with my oohs and ahs. So, Susan, did you want to?
Yeah, we have a couple questions here. I'll start with the first one from Sally. She asks, is that right that Victoria didn't have any kind of formal education? Could she really have been capable of being the President of the United States in 1872?
Well, she didn't have much formal education. I don't think she had more than 3 years. And I don't know how much formal education people actually had who were not allowed to vote and running for president at the same time in 1872. I think Victoria knew that what she was engaging in was political theater, and that her candidacy was to bring forward a point to mix things up, as opposed to really actually serve in office.
That's fascinating. Here's another question. I didn't get who it's from. I'll find it later. How is it that Victoria and her family ended up living in England? She seemed to have so much going for her here in New York City.
Well, at the time that she left New York City, she'd run out of a lot of options. They'd already been in prison several times. There had been several economic crashes by 1877. And following the death of Cornelius Vanderbilt, legend has it that his oldest son, William Vanderbilt, paid Tennessee and Victoria $100,000 in 1877 money to leave the United States and to never come back, so that they would be out of the picture when Commodore Vanderbilt's will was contested.
Well, I have a question for you, so I'm going to be piggy and just get in here and ask you, when did you first hear about Victoria Woodhull?
Oh, my husband's so sick of this answer. It was on the bus. I was commuting to New York City and reading Barbara Goldsmith's Other Powers. And I had a big commute and a big book, and I'm sitting in the front seat so I can spread out a little bit. I just had that luck that I got the front seat. And I opened this book, and it starts with Victoria running for president like for the 3rd time or something. And I mean, what? I mean, because I knew about Belva Lockwood, but who was this woman? Who was this woman? And it just started, and it just had a life of its own. This was 2000 and I think it was 2013.
Do we have some other questions that people want to type in the chat field, and we'll get you going on here? Other than that, I'll ask another question here. Were Tennessee and Victoria both spiritualists at the same time?
Yes.
And they seemed to cross the line about what was we would consider appropriate clairvoyant behavior? Was that
Oh, I
typical?
took a little bit of license with that because spiritualists, while really fantastic in the feminist movement, because they would be able to say truth, speak truth to power while they were in a trance, they also had a little bit of a habit, a reputation of being just on this side of the naughty and risque.
Great.
And you know,
Joyce wants to know, what does your novel do with Victoria's life that the other biographies don't do?
the biographies. Well, I believe that there was an aspect of her, and I don't know if I have the language how to say this in a nuanced way, but I think she was a little bit messianic of herself, that her own imagination, and this is like the thing about do they really believe in their own spiritualist powers? I think that when people seduce themselves, which they have to do in order to become public figures in such a way as this, and to have this the river running against them, so they have to hypnotize themselves in a way. I think that what I did in my book is she pretty much commits the unthinkable, and I can't say what that is, but she, when she was in prison, she actually historically had a religious conversion, and became a devout Catholic following the 3 nights that she stayed in the tombs for the second time. And I just had to put something in there that would make somebody need that kind of forgiveness on that level. That's what I do, that they don't have in the other books.
Excellent.
I just made it up.
Well, Karen Rappaport asked, she wanted to hear more about your research process, in
Okay.
terms of, when you wrote this. So where did you start to dig, et cetera?
I started at my local library, the Westfield Memorial Library, and then from there I started branching out online. And I also had the very good fortune that a dear friend of mine is a retired librarian of Congress. And it's like going to a venue with a movie star. So when you walk into a library with my magical friend, she had like a couple of things here, and she would just call ahead, say she was coming. All the librarians stand up and like start opening books. And at the New York Historical Society, it was magic. And at the Frick collection, and then watching how she operated and how she sort of navigated. And I have this list of things from the indexes of all the books, because I started collecting all the biographies of people in the period and stuff, and going to the New York Public Library where they had original issues of papers at the time. And I just found that that my narrative groove really started being from the media of that period, because these women were so media savvy, and the media had so much to say about them. And that's what's sort of crazy and creepy about the period that we're living in now, is that true and fact, fair and comment is the highest standard of journalism. But they also have to sell papers. And so that's what started shaping the story. And almost all of the newspapers in the history of this country are available through the Library of Congress. You can sit at home and you can pull them up and read what the press was saying about people at that time. And then I got involved in journals and stuff like that. People who hated them, people who loved them, people.
So this was your first book. So what process did you go through to, once you were inspired by the story and thought, okay, I want to write about this,
Mm-hmm.
to getting it out on the shelves?
I wrote the biggest, heaviest book in all the land, It looked like the New York Yellow Pages from the 1970s. And then I went to the Historical Novel Society conference and said, here I am. And I learned that first-time authors are not supposed to do that, but that's a no-no. The first novel is supposed to be a very specific size. And so I started trying to figure out how to make it thus. And the technical aspects of moving backwards and forwards and inside and outside, it was really hard. And then I started submitting it, and I got some lovely, lovely rejections over the months. And then, and that I call that the process of elimination, you know, the queering thing. And then a woman who had done very well self-publishing her book, she had written a thriller. I met with her and talked to her and listened to what she was saying. And I also was looking at book covers that made me so unhappy, that are in the mainstream press. And I just decided that I would go my own way, because that's what the Claflin sisters would have done.
Yeah.
Or else they would have got an amazing book deal with Simon Schuster. But I you know, this is what I did.
Yeah. No, I'm self-published, and you know, I went through something very similar where lots and lots of good, you know, good feedback, but it wasn't happening, and so I made it happen.
Right, and also you want to tell your story, not the story that. It's a tricky thing, because you know, this whole idea, well, what is it like? What is the book like? It has to be like a certain thing so that people recognize it. And then when you're reading all these things that it's like, that's not necessarily the story you want to tell. So it's tricky.
Right. Right. So Susan, I think there's some more.
Yes, we have a question from Pamela. She wants to know, why did Vanderbilt want the sisters out of the country when the father's will was read?
Oh, because two things. One is he was afraid that Tennessee was given $2,500 in Cornelius's will, and also this painting, Aurora. And he was afraid that his sister would say that his father was insane with syphilis as a result of his association with Tennessee. Now, we don't have evidence that Tennessee had syphilis. We know that she had some ailment. She had some kind of ailment. And one of their contemporaries, two of their contemporaries talked about, they believed that she had sexually transmitted disease. And so Vanderbilt's oldest daughter, it was feared by William that she was going to say, well, her father was insane from syphilis as a result of his affair with Tennessee. And therefore he couldn't, you know, give all the money to William, because see, William got all the money in the will. The other kids got almost nothing.
Here's another question from Nev. She asks, hi, Carrie, what would you want your readers to gain from your book? Something I always have a hard time articulating.
I would want them to believe that I would want them to be inspired by the fact that these women, even though they went through a terrible time of it, I would want them to be inspired to be fearless and just to go and do an extraordinary thing, even if it's a totally fruitless endeavor, that those kinds of things are worth doing just because it's part of, you know, we have to live our lives so that they're meaningful to us.
And I have a quick question. Were the tombs where Victoria and Tennessee were held, were they at what is now the Jefferson Market Library?
No, I think that's the Ludlow Street Library. I think I think Ludlow Street Market is there. That's an excellent question. There's the Essex Market Jail, and the tombs that they were held in is the one that looked like what the reservoir used to look like. Also, that structure that looked like the tombs, and then it was sinking. I think it's where Jeffrey Husey was incarcerated.
Oh, Epstein.
Epstein, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. And how many years did you spend researching this book?
I was researching it probably really immersively for about 2.5 years. I started writing about the last 6 months of that period. I didn't know what this story was going to be because everything was a rabbit hole, because the sisters kept contradicting their own autobiography. They whitewashed everything they did. Everything they did was a lie, pretty much. But then it would turn out to be true, you know, which was also something about my mom reminded me. She was always constantly doing, you know, tall tales, and then something would turn out to be true. So about 2 years in, I started writing, and it became the story that it eventually became. By the third year, it would resemble this form, but the research never stopped, and there's so much more to do because research is fun, writing is hard.
Yeah, we hear that from every single author, that the research is the fun part and the writing is the hard part.
Because you show up to dinner and you say, "Did you know?" You look at the computer screen, it's like, oh my God.
Well, Carrie, where can people find out more about you and buy your book? And we do have a link, you know, in there, but you know, if you want to pitch a little bit more about what's going on with you and your launch. This just came out, what, this year, right?
Yes, it did. It came out just as we went into our first quarantine.
Yeah.
The book, see, I lightened up the cover too because it wasn't reproducing nicely. You know, it was a little too murky, so I lightened it up a bit. But
I like that one.
you can get it on bookshop.org or .com. What is it? Bookshop is the independent booksellers website, and also it's on Amazon. And I have a little website called carriehayes.net, N-E-T. The other Carrie Hayes is a Canadian designer. On carriehayes.net.
All right.
Oh, it's bookshop.org. Fanula just said it's bookshop.org. And Sadie said, "Are you recording an audio version?" Yes, and in fact, the woman reading Tennessee is here, Melissa Miller. And Deborah Feldman, who's also in it, is here. It's for multiple voices, and it has been quite the ride. But it seemed, because there were so many people, I couldn't figure out how to possibly do this with just one voice, because no one would know what's going on. And so it's a cast of thousands. It's like the audio Cecil B. DeMille version of Moses. I mean, it's just all the different people show up and play their parts. But Melissa is reading Tennessee, and she has made it such a joy and has given it so much color that it's just it's been very, very fun, I have to say, filled with enormous gratitude. And it should be in an audio outlet by the end of the year, certainly, for the holidays. Audiobooks for the holidays.
Congratulations. All right. So do we have any final questions for Carrie?
I think that's the end of the questions that were typed to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think I only had like one that was direct to me. So, all right. Well, Carrie, I want to thank you again for joining us today. This was just lovely and so much fun learning about Victoria Woodhull and her sister Tennessee and this dawning of the Gilded Age. And we do see so many parallels with our current time. And I really appreciate you bringing this up.
Well, I'd like to just leave with this one thought, which is so extraordinary, is that with the last election, Kamala Harris has taken that glass ceiling and removed it. So while Hillary, put a mighty crack in it, there is no glass. And so all of this has become wonderfully almost behind us now.
Yes. And a lot of joy. A lot of joy around that.
Yeah. So Thank you, Faith.
Well, thank you, Carrie. And again, I want to thank Susan for hosting us and doing all the behind the scenes tech work. Wonderful, wonderful work. All the people on the steering committee who this past year have handled the social media, the programming, they've been hosting these things. Again, my really sincere thanks. Everybody did yeoman's work this year. And we hope to do as well or better next year. So look out for more information from us, and please feel free to check out the national organization. And like I said, if you go to the conference, whether it's virtual or real, you will get a lot out of it. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Have a wonderful holiday season. See you all in 2021.